fostering access and excellence in higher education. Other titles include The Federalist Papers, a commentary, a publication that I'm familiar with, Let the Advice Be Good, a defense of Madison's democratic nationalism, George Washington, a collection, The Essential Anti-Federalists, and the works of Fisher Ames. Dr. Allen is married to Carol M. Allen, a research specialist at Michigan State University. Dr. and Mrs. Allen have 2 adult children, one a professor of classics at the University of Chicago, the other a clerk for Justice Kennedy of the United States Supreme Court. He is currently professor of political science at Michigan State University. Having had the personal privilege, of studying the Federalist Papers under Dr. Allen's tutelage, I am enthusiastic and excited about his being here to speak to you tonight. The title of Dr. Allen's talk will be Best Friends, the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. William B. Allen.
Thank you. Thank you. I like the sound of that, fellow patriots. Thank you, fellow patriots. I've long wanted to be in New Hampshire in a presidential election year. Well, actually, I was here once before in one, but that was after Christmas in 1992, and the election had already unhappily concluded. Now I'm here on time. Where do I get my ballot? It is such a pleasure to spend this day with you and to be involved in your workshops and to witness the work of NHCCS these several years now. I take special pride in having even a remote association with so fundamental and rich a display of those arts of citizenship which are so much at stake in this experiment, which it still is, in the Republic of the United States of America. It is a wonderful thing to contemplate the beauties that were conceived for us in this way of life, just as it is, of course, a painful thing to reflect upon all of those detours and dangers that we confront from misapplication or misunderstanding of the principles of our Constitution. We have today been generously treated to a review of the abuses to which our Constitution is often subject. And what I'd like to do this evening is not to continue, though there is scope to say much more about all the wrong that has been done in that vein, but to seek to reawaken in some way those fundaments which are the source, really, of our concern to begin with, to show how it is it might even be possible for our judiciary, by returning to the source, to come to a purer understanding of the tendencies of American political life and the providences that were vouchsafed to us so very long ago. And that's why I've taken up this theme of best friends, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution of the United States of America. See, on this occasion, I want to beat an old horse just to prove that it's not dead. Now, in this task, I am not unlike the Greek rhapsode Aeon, who kept Homer alive by memorizing Homer's entire poetry and reciting every opportunity. Unlike Aeon, however, I trust that I do not make the mistake of memorizing the wisdom of the author for the wisdom of the rhapsode. The relation between the Declaration and the Constitution has a different affect today than it did in 1860, say, when enemies to the more perfect union could find no pillar bearing more weight and thus to be dislodged than what they called the self-evident lie that all men are created equal. Those critics insisted that men indeed are not by nature made equal, nor should be. Today's enemies, 21st century enemies of the more perfect union, believe that all men in 1776 meant only white males, and moreover, that not even they were by nature made equal, though they should be. These contemporary critics insist, however, that what nature and history refuse to humankind, law can create. And they would indeed have all men equalized, the Constitution notwithstanding. In 1860, nothing and no one so stoutly resisted the enemies of the Declaration than the defender of the Constitution. Today, nothing and no one so stoutly resist the enemies of the Constitution than the defender of the Declaration. Abraham Lincoln established at Gettysburg that the nation conceived in liberty and confirmed in the proposition that all men are created equal must conduct its affairs through limited constitutional union. Today, we require to learn that limited constitutional union can only be justified on the basis of the Declaration of Independence. What we mean then, when we say that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are best friends, is that they are necessary and reciprocal supports of each other. Two proofs are necessary to complete this argument. First, that the Declaration requires limited constitutional union. And second, that the Constitution requires the principle of equality founded in the laws of nature and God's creation. We may restate the first inquiry in the following form. Is it true that the rebellion against British monarchy would have been unjustified on any grounds other than those of natural rights, and that natural rights must disclose not only people's claims to justice, but their capacities to realize those claims? When stated thus, the first proof becomes, I believe, easily realizable. Let's start with the negative argument, if you will. The British Constitution and laws in no way recognized a right of revolution. Accordingly, the act of revolution could not have been founded on any positive authority. Moreover, the Americans were not disproportionately harmed relative to other subjects of the British monarchy. Therefore, as far as the conceded rights of Englishmen went, the Americans could have had no beef against the crown. Although non tallagio non concedendo, that's the language they use, no taxation without consent, was an established principle of positive right in Britain, it was honored more in the breach than in the practice, given the pervasive influence of rotten boroughs. Americans were no less well represented than many of Britain, nor could America make any secession claim, since the colonies could not affect an autonomous, independent status, conditioning their place in the British Empire. To have a right to secede, they would have had to begin with voluntary assimilation into the empire. Political forms, which are themselves artifices, cannot derive principles of their conduct from nature as opposed to their architecture. In other words, states do not have natural rights, only people do. If the Americans were justified at all, in other words, their justification had to be extrajudicial, extra-political, and extra-historical. Nobody on this earth gave them the right to revolt. When we read the Declaration of Independence, we notice not only the broad language of its exordium, wherein in the course of human events, and the universal principles in its enunciation, we hold these truths to be self-evident, but we can especially notice the particular charges, the long train of abuses and oppressions, usurpations, leveled against the king. It has been frequently noted that the very form of the Declaration's indictment identifies the king rather than the Parliament as the enemy to America's liberty. Sometimes this is thought to be a ruse to avoid acknowledging Parliament's authority. The Americans, by the way, claimed an interpretation of the British Constitution that made America, or the American colonies, directly subject to the monarch without the intervention of the Parliament. A careful reading, however, discloses a substantive and a not really rhetorical argument that highlights the Declaration as an initial charter of government. So they named the king for good reason, and the good reason shows why the Declaration points to the Constitution. The first 12 charges against the king, all of them, that is, until you come to the 13th, which associates the king with the Parliament in opposition to the colonies, the first 12 actually condemn the king foremost for ignoring the welfare of his subjects. The language of the very first charge is meant to characterize the particulars in all of those that follows, and this is how it reads. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Now, the laws that the colonists speak and write about at this moment are the laws of their colonial legislatures, not any laws of Parliament. Thus, the substance of the charge is that the king, their sovereign, has declined to cooperate in their exertions of lawful and subordinate self-government with an eye to the public welfare. The implicit argument made here clearly is that persons are subject to government only for their good. And that argument is a principle that transcends any charter, any act of government. It establishes a standard of judgment. And that standard of judgment is one to which every government of whatever caste is subject. Not in the name of which any people, and I should say in the name of which any people, any time, have the right, nay the duty, to quote the Declaration of Independence, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Now, each of the remaining charges in the Declaration of Independence against the king reinforces the same principle. Each is a particular proof of the universal truth contained in the Declaration's enunciation. Perhaps none does so, however, so centrally as that in which they accuse him of neglecting the necessary exercise of legislative powers in such a manner as to cause that the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise. This very observation is followed with the particular notice that the result is to expose the people, inadequately provided, and as observed earlier this afternoon by Delegate Atherton, to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions from within. This observation, then, makes the necessary argument that the purpose of government is, while in general to provide for the public welfare, in particular it is to accomplish such acts as the people, otherwise unprovided, unprotected, cannot so well provide for themselves. And where the constituted government, limited by this purpose, fails, it falls to the people speedily to provide such a government as can respect these limits and accomplish these results. Now, each of the charges against the king can be converted into a positive affirmation of the obligations of government, and this is the key to the argument. Take the indictment, turn it around into positive statements, and what you get is a description of a constitution. For example, government must respond to immediate and pressing needs, relying upon local necessities and judgments wherever delays in execution would be a necessary part of reserving judgment to the highest or higher authority. The needs of the people must be accommodated without the cost of them relinquishing the right of representation. Legislatures must operate in such a manner as to remain readily accessible to the people and with recourse to public records. Dissent must be respected within the assemblies that conduct the public business. Free movement of persons into and out of the country is a fundamental part of the liberty of the citizens. Judicial powers must be independent of executive will and be empowered to render justice to persons. Citizens should not be burdened with excessive requirements to support public offices. A military administration is incompatible with public liberty, and the military must be subordinate to and dependent upon the civil power. So those are the positive affirmations of the negative statements in the Declaration, and they tell us a great deal. The architecture of government sought in these affirmations is founded in universal principles and not the English Constitution. If there are any doubt about this, the doubt will be resolved not merely by comparing this to the actual English Constitution of the day, but also by considering the weighty charge against the king concerning his activities in Canada. There was something going on there too, you might remember, called the Quebec Act. For there, according to the revolutionaries, the king had abolished the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it